It is coming up to 6:45. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is on a campaign to salvage his image. His visit to Washington DC last week was met with large demonstrations outside the capital, with thousands of protesters calling for an end to the war in Gaza and his arrest for alleged war crimes. But inside the capital, a complete contrast. US lawmakers welcoming the Israeli Prime Minister with a standing ovation.
The Prime Minister of the State of Israel.
Frustration over Netanyahu's prosecution of the war in Gaza is growing both at home and in the US. New leadership in the White House could see a shift in the country's relations. I'm joined now by former US State Department Policy Advisor for the Middle East, Laura Blumenfeld. Laura, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you.
What did we learn from Netanyahu's speech to Congress?
Well, we learned that he's great at public diplomacy, but not that good at actual diplomacy. The speech was soaring. It was great rhetoric, but it stood in really stark contrast with the grim statistics back home. And everybody found something to criticize about that speech. The folks on the left were saying, why didn't he mention the humanitarian crisis or the civilian casualties in Gaza, the hostage families who are still waiting for their loved ones to come home and they're hoping for a ceasefire deal. They've been held in Gaza for over 9 months now in captivity by Hamas. He didn't mention a hostage deal. He didn't broker the deal. So there was something for everybody to sort of be unhappy with. And then he had those tough meetings with, usually prime ministers come to Washington and they have to meet with one president. Netanyahu met with 3 former, current, potential future presidents, and those were even harder.
I want to go back to his speech. I mean, he did outline his vision, a demilitarised and de-radicalised Gaza. What did you make of that?
Well, what I thought when I heard that, I was like, ooh, somebody twisted Netanyahu's arm. You know, when I worked at the State Department, he's never been an easy ally. I worked there under President Obama, and there were many days where there was more sort of bickering than brokering. But when I heard that kind of sketch, which talked about a demilitarized and de-radicalized Gaza, I thought finally he's putting something forward. I mean, to be fair to him, any Israeli who says, here's my proposal for Gaza, that's just putting a big black X on it for the Palestinians, because why would they want to ride into Gaza on the back, on the tanks, Israeli tanks? It sort of delegitimizes it. And on the other hand, if it sounds too much sort of liberal and forward leaning toward the Palestinians, then the right wing of his coalition will pull out and his government will collapse. He's in a tough place. It doesn't mean that he doesn't deserve tough criticism.
No, but we saw that standing ovation, Laura. I mean, how much of that was met with criticism? And also, given his 15-minute speech, are we going to see the needle somewhat shift?
Well, it's interesting, actually. His staff counted 44 standing ovations. But for folks who were in the room I spoke with, I mean, it was really clear that it was mostly the Republicans standing. That's kind of like preaching to the choir. And then for the Democrats, first of all, there were empty seats, and it kind of fell on deaf ears. It was considered tone deaf because of what he didn't say. I'll tell you the biggest criticism coming from Israel was he didn't say the one thing the Israelis have been desperate to hear since October 7th, which is, I own this mistake. I hold myself accountable. The IDF has already started launching internal investigations to figure out what went wrong that day, that so many Israelis were slaughtered. I mean, the safe haven turned into a slaughterhouse for Israel. But Netanyahu still has said a lot of words, but none of them, like where the buck stops with me.
Some of those words included praising Biden and Trump. So where does Kamala Harris stand on Gaza policy?
Well, it's fascinating. As you know, there's a crisis now today where we stand on the verge of a ceasefire in Gaza, but also a wildfire across the broader Middle East because Hezbollah launched a rocket that landed in a Druze Israeli community, killing over 12 children and wounding many others. So Kamala Harris is really trying to make it clear that although she is expressing more empathy for Palestinians in Gaza and sort of calling Israel to task for that humanitarian crisis, she still stands with Israel. She just issued a statement emphasizing the Ironclad alliance between Israel and the United States. And I think her message is, there's no daylight between Israel and the United States, and that should not give any kind of green light to Iran and its proxies. And Israel's sitting kind of in this hall of mirrors where everywhere they look in every direction is a proxy of Iran. And she's saying to Israel, we're with you. Although I might change something in tone, there's nothing difference between me and President Biden in terms of substance.
Laura Blumenfeld, thank you so much for your time this morning. Really appreciate our chat.
Great to be here. Have a wonderful day.
You too.